All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me. And welcome back. If this is a return trip, and welcome if this is your first time. This is a reaction channel. So this reaction is going to be a request from Jennifer Harrison through Buy Me a Coffee. It's longer than I normally am comfortable with doing. It's 34 minutes, almost 35 minutes. It's titled Bob Hawke, An Extraordinary Life as the People's PM, an Australian story. So, I don't know if you don't watch it all at one time. Maybe you'll come back and continue watching it and finishing it out. Again, I don't normally like to do them this long. This is mainly a musical reaction channel. 8 minutes or less, far as the meat of the video. But this one is request, and Jennifer is a strong supporter of this channel, so I'm gonna do this one for her, and to show my appreciation of all that she has done. So I brought it up here. I posted the 2-minute something of a bunch of news articles about Bob Hawke. Seemed like she said, a good bloke. But she says right here, it says, the real Bob Hawke, former Prime Minister, the larrikin genius. His leadership is what the world is lacking today, is most democratic countries. So I think what she's trying to say, his leadership is what the world is lacking today in most, instead of is, in most democratic countries. Okay. So, well, let's just get into it. Here we go, y'all.
Bob Hawke was an intellectual larrikin. His intellect meant he was completely at ease rubbing shoulders with world leaders, and his larrikinism meant he was just as at ease with ordinary Australians wherever he met them. I had the privilege of working with him as his senior press secretary for 4 years, 4 memorable and inspiring years. Tonight's episode of Australian Story was filmed on the eve of Bob's 85th birthday, as he, his family, his friends and his former colleagues look back over a life well lived. This is Hawke's story.
Hawke.
The thing I admired the most about my grandfather is definitely his passion. His passion for life, his passion for our country. I believe that's why he was never voted out by the people.
Even now, if you go anywhere, people just appear from nowhere. I mean, they find him. Okay. And they all love him.
Young baby!
Hawke had the magic formula. He was a common man, loved his footy, cricket, his beer. But there's always another side.
Now, you are just being a bloody pest.
Some people think that Bob's simple, some people think he's very complex. I think he's both.
Hundreds of people mobbed Mr. Hawke as he moved towards his car.
People ask why was Dad so popular. You knew where you stood with Dad. He was clear and, unlike a lot of the politics of today, conducted politics as a contest of ideas.
We need to get everyone listening to the other bloke's point of view.
The Australian Labor Party is not afraid of change. We welcome change.
He was a good ACT president, but when he came Prime Minister, he became a great Prime Minister.
From the man I first met, Bob has mellowed a great deal. Darling, if you don't eat, you'll starve to death.
Oh, I can't have that, can we?
No, here's some
Thank you, darling.
chips.
Thank you.
He's very quiet. He's a much more inward man. I don't know what he's thinking about, but I do know enough to know not to ask him. As his biographer, it was completely important for me to understand his childhood, and until I did, I didn't understand the man at all.
I was born in Bordertown, South Australia, a very small country town. My father was a congregational minister there. My mother had been a teacher, absolutely passionate about education. I remember her saying to me, "Bob, you've been born with brains, but you've got to use them and develop them." My brother Neil was 9 years my senior, and I didn't know him very well because he was sent off early to King's College in Adelaide. I was very proud of my big brother.
When Neil was just 19, he caught meningitis.
He died very quickly, and I can still remember how totally devastated my mother was.
Neil's death meant that all of that energy that had gone into Neil suddenly was concentrated on Bob. He became the adored and treasured child who had to be looked after at all times.
I won a scholarship from Perth Modern School to the university. Much to Mum's reluctance, they got me a motorbike. At the end of the second term of the university, I got thrown off. I ruptured my spleen. I was on the critically ill list for about a week. I mean, I was really hanging between life and death. I believe that God had spared my life and that I had an obligation now to make sure that I made the very most of it. But that meant pushing myself to the limits.
Mum and Dad first met, probably they were 15 or 16 when their paths overlapped in Christian youth group. They were passionately in love. Their story very much was a love story. The idea of winning a Rhodes Scholarship featured fairly strongly with Dad.
I went to Oxford in '53, and when I made the decision that I would do the research degree, the thing that stuck out was the conciliation and arbitration system, and particularly the setting of the basic wage. Well, that choice that I made then, little did I know, but it determined the rest of my life.
The plan when Dad went to Oxford was that Mum would join him there. Dad, almost as soon as he arrived, started writing letters urging her to bring forward her date of embarkation.
We had a marvellous time not only in Oxford, we took our little van and toured around a lot of Europe.
I think we kids saw it as a sort of an enchanted time before we came along.
Hayes and I returned from Oxford early in 1956, got married in Perth, and then we went off to Canberra. My immediate plans were quite clear. I'd won the scholarship to go to the ANU to do my doctorate.
My wife and I arrived at University House at the same time as Bob and Hazel. He had this irresistible matiness. He was extraordinarily exuberant, sometimes pugnacious, but always high-spirited. And people even then seriously asked the question of this chap, do you think he'll be Prime Minister one day? He exuded the idea that politics was sort of at his feet.
He decided to go and work for the ACTU as their advocate before the Arbitration Commission. Fortunately, he was very successful in his first wage case. He was very aggressive, he infuriated most of the bench, but he won. And he became an overnight rock star.
The 15 shillings basic wage increase is a tribute to the union's panel of advocates which presented the case.
Usually after a day at the bar, we'd adjourn to the other bar.
The normal course of events after work was to go and have 4 glasses of beer. For Bob, more like 24 glasses of beer.
press would often come to the John Curtin Hotel to interview him. He had the meeting out of his hand, in a sense.
1970 will go down in industrial history as the year of Mr. Hawke. In less than 8 months as president of the ACTU, he's attracted more attention than his predecessor did in 8 years. What has 1970 done to you personally?
1970 has done this to me, that I get very much less sleep in 1970 than I've ever got before. It's imposed greater strains upon my domestic life.
When he was home, that was, you know, exciting because he wasn't home much. I used to love going to things with him.
Well, a lot of the time when he was home, he just wanted to flop around and read the papers and not do much, which is fair enough, I suppose, given the rather hectic life he led.
Whatever time you got with him was considered a bonus, really, because he belonged to everyone else. We knew that we came second, not, you know, his job was first always.
Congratulations. How does it feel to be Father of the Year?
In 1971, Dad won Father of the Year award, which really remains an abiding mystery, doesn't it?
The one who really should have the title is my wife. She has to be father as well as mother most of the time.
I know Hazel was extremely unimpressed about Bob getting Father of the Year and how inappropriate that was.
Mr. Hawke, if you don't mind me saying, you're looking a little weary, can we presume?
Bob has always driven himself to the point of collapse.
When you're president of the ACTU, not even a seriously rigged back can prevent the paperwork piling up or stop the phone calls coming.
I sometimes thought that the death of his elder brother was as if all the energy of that young man had come down into him so that he had an extra tank.
Someone once described him thus, and I quote, "He swears like a trooper, he works like a demon, he performs like a playboy, he talks like a truckie, and he acts like a politician." Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Hawke.
He was a man's man, and the women loved him too, so I mean he had them both going for him. And television was a big draw card in those days.
But how much of that description that I gave there, which is from the National Times, is true? I take it, swears like a trooper?
Oh, yeah.
This one I'm not quite sure about. Performs like a playboy? I have my moments.
We first met in Jakarta in 1970 at a party. He'd just become president of the ACTU. I didn't know who the hell he was.
I was immediately very much attractive to Blanche, not simply because of her considerable beauty, but her character and her probing mind, and a charm that, you know, I found very compelling. But the whole situation was complicated by politics and what I might be doing politically.
Mr. Hawke, just about everybody in this country has some feelings for and against you.
Nobody said to him, you can't be Prime Minister and get divorced. He was savvy enough to know that himself. And look, I must say, I think it was that they got their marriage together.
Mr. Hawke, in a recent newspaper article, you said that you believed that you had the makings of a Prime Minister.
He wanted to come into Parliament and become Prime Minister. But there was always a character issue about Bob Hawke. And the character issue went to the women and the drinking.
The public was starting to cotton on that this was a man that, for all his good sides, had this very dark side and was, a lot of the time, out of control.
Well, wait a minute.
I've got a point I want to make. Don't be rude.
Well, don't you be rude to me. Let me finish what I'm saying.
He used to start drinking brandy at breakfast time. He needed to stop drinking.
I tend, I think, occasionally to take too much refuge in having a drink. And I think that's helped me, but on occasions I've taken that refuge too much.
I knew that I could never afford to be in a position where I could do something stupid as a result of having too much to drink. So I gave up drinking.
Frankly, I underestimated Hawke. I felt that Hawke would probably burn out, that he would lack the discipline to pull himself together. But I, like a lot of people, got that wrong.
Well, as you've no doubt already heard, the long-awaited news, ACTU President Bob Hawke
has finally taken the plunge and will stand for pre-selection for the seat of Wills.
Let's look at Wills now, the seat that Mr Hawke has won tonight.
In going into Parliament, I went in with a determination to become the leader of the party. I could do things that would be good for my country. Australia was an enormously divided country in 1983 after 7 years of Fraser, and I had a foundational commitment to trying to bring the country together to get a sense of consensus.
Tonight, a nationwide special. Australia's most dramatic day in politics since November the 11th, 1975.
Malcolm Fraser got out of bed that morning at the Lodge, bent on an election. Fraser knew the Labor leadership was in the melting pot.
Even as the party's parliamentary executive arrived for today's meeting here in Brisbane, Mr Hayden's fate had been sealed. He'd been approached after private meetings overnight and reluctantly advised to stand aside.
What that meant was that Fraser would face Bob Hawke, not Bill Hayden, at the election. I was with Hawke in Brisbane on the second or third day after the transition. There were a mass of people surrounding him and there were women crying. They just wanted to touch him and they were weeping in the street.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next Prime Minister of Australia has arrived.
We're all very excited because we all believe that we're on the verge of victory. We were certain that we were coming back, so the elation was palpable.
There's a sense of inevitability about it. For years, the nation has been waiting for him to make his run. And now it's happening before our very eyes.
I'd been at plenty of election nights with Mum and Dad before, but this was a bit different. It's not a question of winning or losing like a sports match. It's a question of, was Dad going to be responsible, bottom line, for the welfare of the country?
Bob Hawke and his wife Hazel have just arrived here in the tally room in Canberra.
The night of the election, I realised now I had an enormous responsibility. The country was divided, the economy was in an absolute shambles and going backwards. So there was a mixture of excitement and elation and a sense of sombre responsibility.
Bob Hawke moved very easily and naturally into the Prime Ministership, as if he'd been waiting for it all along, as if it was the most natural thing in the world one morning to find that you were Prime Minister.
The people at the Lodge had never seen a PM like him. They were amazed at how he treated them. One of his drivers, Bede, first day he's sort of picking up Bob, and he said I couldn't even get out to open the door for him. He said, next minute he's sitting alongside me. And he said, he said, I'm Bob, and how do you do, Bede? And he said, I don't think any different to me. I'm PM, but I'm working for the government, same as you, Bede, so just call me Bob.
I have the greatest pleasure
call me Bob.
in welcoming all participants and observers to this historic National Economic Summit Conference.
The Economic Summit was an unprecedented event.
That nothing of this scale and scope has been attempted before.
This was the start of Hawke's new vision.
Mr Hawke was elected on a promise of bringing Australians together. Well, after just 5 weeks, there they are. The captains of industry, the union bosses, the politicians, a cross-section of Australian society had spent 4 days grappling with ways to achieve a common goal, get the economy moving.
The accord meant there was a formal partnership between the unions and the government. There was wage restraint to assist the economy, and the trade-off was a social wage, better health, better education, better working conditions.
When the phone started ringing in dealing rooms this morning, trading was frenetic.
Later in the year, the government floated the dollar. This was the most important economic decision since World War II.
Young people seem to be intoxicated by the Hawke charisma.
They react to him more like a media personality than a Prime Minister.
All right, how are we going, boys?
The important thing about Hawke's cabinet was that it operated on the basis of argument, not authority. Sometimes that process could be pretty ugly, pretty rough. Any normally sensitive human being, any normally modest human being, simply can't survive in politics. You have to have profound psychological defects of one kind or another to get to high places, and Hawke was absolutely no different from the rest of us in that respect.
How funny. I had ministers who were just outstandingly good.
What the Leader of the Opposition did was produce a noisy, empty speech.
Hawke-Keating was an outstandingly good parliamentarian. He had a quick wit and sharp tongue.
And as far as you're concerned, unless you're scripted, you're useless.
In relation to Bob and Paul working together, I saw no animosity, no difficulties in the relationship, and a lot of warmth.
Which way are you going to point him? It's gone in the bushes.
I knew that he was an ambitious man, and he was entitled to be. My ambition was to get the best out of Paul that I possibly could.
We are building together a nation in which there are no second-class Australians.
Hawke had been riding high. Everything was going very well for him. And then in September 1984, things began to fall apart.
I got the call from Hazel to say that my daughter Rosalind was a heroin addict and was in considerable trouble with that. This was a devastating blow.
You don't cease to be a husband. You don't cease to be a father.
Bob is an emotional fellow and he has cried in public before that. But he was now the Prime Minister and it needed an explanation.
I think what got to Bob was that, I mean, we've both been aware of this, and it's been something which we've carried along, well, in his case, with working maybe a 16 to a 20-hour day at times, and fronting up, smiling, working, doing all the things, one carries it.
I felt extraordinarily low, and then we came to the election, and I had this awful experience.
It was the annual cricket match between the press gallery and the Prime Minister's office.
There was considerable concern about Mr Hawke's right eye, which was cut when the ball smashed the lens of his glasses.
Will this in any way change your campaigning plan?
No, it could have, but no.
I went through that 1984 election campaign in physical agony.
It was pretty obvious that Hawke was off his game, badly off his game, in the run-up to the election. We did much worse than we'd all expected to do, largely as a result of that.
Paul Keating has often said that Hawke never really recovered from the events of 1984.
I won't have people say that he ran the show from 84 to 89. He didn't. And the history deserves to know that that's the way it was.
I've spent many years talking to Paul about this. My own view is that Hawke did recover, and the reality is that Bob Hawke and Paul Keating worked very successfully together for quite a few years after 1984.
Paradoxically, we get more time together now that we live together in Lodge than we did before.
I think the period that I call the Canberra years were really good years for our family.
Our lives have had difficulties because of the demands, but they've also had a great deal of interest and lots of excitement. And
in a way, it was the best thing that ever happened to their marriage because they did spend so much time together.
You look a bit tired.
Mum came into her own. in terms of having a role and being busy and enjoying what she did and having respect in her own right.
Hazel Hawke has been a strong campaigner for drug education.
Mrs. Hawke officially opened the garden by lifting a cabbage leaf to reveal a commemorative plaque.
Davey, there you are. I was born in 1983 in Melbourne, in the lounge room of my grandfather's house, and I was the first grandchild. We spent a lot of time going between Canberra and Sydney with them on the Air Force jets. You know, we were blessed by the Pope, and we sat down with leaders such as George Bush.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Australia.
Hawke loved the international stage, but by 1987, Bob Hawke faced a very difficult economic and political period in Australia.
The Australian dollar came under renewed pressure today after the release of the latest balance of payments figures.
Bob Hawke and Hawke-Keating and other economic ministers set about explaining our circumstances and introducing some of the biggest cuts in government spending in Australia's history.
Continuing on his hard sell of the mini-budget around the country, Mr Hawke gave his strongest indication yet that the next election will be held soon after the August budget.
The 1987 election is when Hawke and Keating are at their zenith. They win the election after a very difficult economic and political period in Australia. But Keating decided after the 1987 election, the third term was the term for the transition to Keating.
Are you prepared to be Treasurer for 4 more years?
Yes, I think so. I mean, if...
Doesn't sound very convincing.
Well, I'm just saying, if the public will have us, we'll have them. You know, that's long and short of it.
I'd been a successful leader in the 3 campaigns. My leadership was an important part of Labor's continuing success, and I wanted to keep it that way.
I certainly hope and I expect that Paul will stay. Now, I don't discount that, you know, he could go. But if he were to go, there are people of very considerable talent in the ministry, and the position would be filled.
The moment Hawke said that, I knew Keating would be enraged. As far as he was concerned, the relationship was over, Hawke was finished, there had to be a leadership transition to him. What Hawke did at the end of the day was he offered Keating a deal, the Kirribilli Pact.
I'd agreed that within next term I'd stand aside and make way for an election which Paul would presumably have won. But there were things that happened after that, including something Paul said about Australia and he wouldn't want to stay here. I won't say how he described Australia, but he'd go off to Paris. And I just didn't like that, and so I changed my mind.
Today, interest rates shot up to a level not even speculated about last month. A new record of 17%.
The economy coming up to the 1990 election was not in the best of shape because we, like the rest of the world, had made a mistake at the end of the 80s where there'd been the stock market collapse and things looked very dicey, and we kept interest rates too low for too long, and so when we had to put them up, we had to really whack them up.
Why should voters now believe that you know what you're talking about?
Because we have been honest in saying that we underestimated the level of demand.
Bob Hawke is back in the lodge in Canberra and sounding like he plans to stay put.
We won. Yeah, we won.
This is his 4th election victory. Nobody in the Labor Party in the entire annals of Labor history has got anywhere near this. He is a unique figure. The celebrations after the 1990 election victory were short-lived. The country went into recession, and that was a really punishing event for Hawke.
This is a recession that Australia had to have.
What happens after that is a convulsive event for the government. Keating pulls the plug, challenges Hawke, and goes to the backbench.
I wanted his job and I tried to take it off him. It's as simple as that.
He, as he was perfectly entitled, made the challenge and missed out. I wasn't sure whether he would have another go. I tended to think he would.
Prime Minister, what chance do you give of surviving the next 48 hours?
I will tell. I, like the others, thought towards the end, for God's sake, make a decision. Make a dignified decision of your own. Don't let others make it for you.
Are you going to stand down?
You've got an moment.
I don't know, I rang him or he rang me the night before, and he said, I think I'm going, Colin. He said, I think they've got the numbers on me.
It had sort of been bubbling, and Mum and I had been on the phone, and she said, you better come down in the morning.
Parliamentary Labour Party have just elected a new leader, consequently a new Prime Minister of Australia, Hawke-Keating.
It was a sombre day. I still remember the day in the lodge. We went and watched his speech on the television.
I wish to thank a number of people, Hazel and my family, who of course have been a magnificent and continuing source of strength and support. Is everyone here?
The enduring achievement of Bob and his ministers was the change that it brought to the Australian economy.
Well, I would like history to talk about Paul and myself in terms of the great things we were able to do together. And his ambition to become leader was perfectly justified, and in the end he had his opportunity and he did some good things. So I hope history will look at the positives and not the occasional tiffs.
I'm thinking about what I'll be talking about at Woodford this year.
When Bob lost the Prime Ministership, it was a quick transition for him. He quickly realised that this door had closed on his life and that there was a new door that would open.
So I just hope it's not 42 degrees this year.
Well, it was in Melbourne. We were having a cup of coffee and he said, I'm leaving Hazel.
The simple fact of life, and it can happen to a Prime Minister as well as to an ordinary citizen. I simply fell in love with Blanche.
What has happened is mutual and amicable, and Hazel and I remain very, very good friends.
When our grandparents split and Bob moved on with Blanche, it really tore our family apart.
Look, at the time, as it is with a lot of families, these things are matters of shock and grief and dissent.
Yeah, I had a couple of tears in my eyes that Blanche said were very nice.
The kids weren't happy about the fact that I divorced and married Blanche.
They didn't want me as part of the family, and they actually put that in writing.
Mum got over it pretty quickly. And she said, oh, I can eat when I like and turn the light off and read in the middle of the night and no snoring. And so Mum quickly adjusted, I think. Perhaps quicker than we did a bit.
After Bob and Hazel split, Hazel was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 6 to 7 years later, and that was obviously a huge challenge for my grandmother and something that really hit my grandfather's heart as well.
In the week that Mum was dying, I felt that there must be closure of some kind for her and Dad. I rang Dad and I said, I think you should come and visit her.
I sat with her and held her hand, and one of her favourite songs was Danny Boy. So I just quietly held her hand and sang Danny Boy to her.
And as Bob turned to leave, I was sitting next to her, and she said very faintly, under her breath, she said, I love you.
Oh, hi, Danger.
Took a bit of time to come around, I think, but it's a matter of real satisfaction to me that the family has reformed.
He didn't even have time for girls.
No time for girls.
That's how busy he was. I know.
Blanche has been a great step-grandmother to my kids and a good stepmother to me.
You going all down here?
No, come on. I've got enough of her nagging without you. Just short of the bunker.
There were long periods in his life when he was not contented, when he was absolutely driven by ambition. He had to change the world, he had to leave it a better place. And I think now that he feels, well, he's done that. He's more or less run his race and he's run it well, and he can afford to relax and enjoy himself.
I'm quite conscious of my mortality, but I don't think about death and I'm not frightened of death.
I would like to see him remembered as one of the greatest moral and political leaders in Australia of the 20th century.
He's a great figure in Australian history. That's the absolute truth. Even those who don't like his politics would find it hard to argue with, I think.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, as this will be my last speech in this chamber as Prime Minister after nearly 9 years.
One of the happiest memories of my time in politics was my very last day. One member of the opposition, he said, "You were a Prime Minister for all Australians." And that certainly warmed the cockles of my heart.
Yeah. Wow, lived to be 90 years old. Yeah, what a good story. I hope y'all stayed around to watch that. It was put together real well. Apparently this was a really loved man, but as in politics, man, your right-hand man is your trusted go-to that you think forever, and then they get aspirations of their own, and they forget everything that you ever did for them, and they just run against you. But at least he was gracious in this interview. He just seemed like like Jennifer said in the last video, he's a good bloke. So rest in peace, Mr. Hawke, and Australia is, I'm sure, proud that they had a chance to live on the earth with you. All right, y'all, so it's a long one, and I apologize, but I didn't want to pause. It really didn't give me a place in there to pause. And I think the story needed to go out. So that's going to do it for me. Till I see y'all again, I'll catch you down the road. Let's go with the outro and be ready for the next one. Bye, y'all.